Hello there. Let's talk about power games. Tagwirei, Xavier Tyson Kasukuwere, Constantino Chiwenga. The three big dogs circling the same bone. The fight to take over from Emerson Mnangagwa as the next kingpin of ZANU PF and maybe even the next president of Zimbabwe. But before we even go there, let's start with a bit of background. For the first time ever, Tagwirei has come out in the open and actually explained how he bagged that dodgy deal to construct the Dema power plant back in 2015. Yes, he spilled the beans on the 26th of June, right there at the National University of Science and Technology in Bulawayo. When the Dema power project was first unveiled in 2015, it came wrapped in urgency, packaged as a lifeline for a nation gripped by blackouts. The government of the late Robert Mugabe painted a picture of salvation. 194 million in US dollars to fix over 3 years to rescue the grid, light up domestic homes, power up the factories, literally power up the economy. But what came next? A trail of numbers that makes no sense at all unless you follow the money. Somewhere in the fog of bureaucracy, the budget was slashed, revised down to a mere 83 million US dollars. There was no explanation, just a figure plucked from thin air. But before the dust could settle, boom, the cost skyrocketed again, ballooning to a mouth-watering 250 million US dollars. That's right, you get it right. From 194 million US dollars, revised down to 83 million, then revised upwards again to 250 million US dollars. Well, welcome to Afro Perspectives. Stay with us while we dig deeper into how Tagwirei and the business mafia running the cartels that control every facet of the economy in Zimbabwe are plundering Zimbabwe to the ground. And that's not all. Sakunda Holdings, fronted by Tagwirei, was not just handpicked for the deal. They were granted national project status, that is by the government of the late Robert Mugabe. That meant perks and privileges, big perks we are talking about here. Chief among them, the right to import 25 million liters of diesel duty-free every month. But here is the twist. The Dema plant only needed 12 million liters of diesel. So one has to ask, where did the extra 13 million liters go? The diesel, that is the extra 13 million liters, were sold on the open market at retail prices, and Tagwirei got close to a cool 7 million US dollars a million. That is in greenbacks, American dollars, a month. But why? Why is this even a story? Why should we care that Tagwirei has finally spoken about the Dema project? Well, because this man is not your average ordinary businessman. No. In Tagwirei, Tagwirei lies something far more dangerous, something more potent than profit margins and fuel imports. In this man potentially lies the future of every Zimbabwean, every man, woman, and child in Zimbabwe. Let that sink in. We are not talking about a chief executive officer who got lucky on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. We are talking about a man who, without holding any elected office, has his hands on every lever of economic power in Zimbabwe. From the days of the late Robert Mugabe, where he held a monopoly on fuel imports, to handing out billions in farm inputs under the so-called Command Agricultural Scheme, to carving out pieces of Zimbabwe's infrastructure and mining projects across the length and breadth of Zimbabwe. Tagwirei is everywhere. And now, under the shiny banner of the Land Tenure Implementation Committee. He is squeezing broke war veterans for $500 per hectare just to turn an offer letter into a title deed. Tagwirei has tentacles in literally everything that goes on in Zimbabwe. And here is the kicker. Inside the ZANU PF, most of the politicians don't lead. They follow Tagwirei's shadow. In Tagwirei, we don't just have a businessman. We have the figurehead of everything that is broken, everything that is wrong in Zimbabwe, everything that is not going well. We have a business class and the cartels plundering the country on an industrial scale. Tagwirei is a tenderpreneur par excellence. He is a political financier, a kingmaker in a system where corruption is not an anomaly but the business model. He has plundered Zimbabwe on an industrial scale, like I have said above, accumulating wealth in the billions while ordinary citizens wrestle with empty tills, crumbling hospitals, and vanishing pensions. If there is one man who can be said to have nearly won the entire economy of Zimbabwe, well, that's an exaggeration maybe. Well, most of the economy of Zimbabwe anyway. Like a casino jackpot, it is this man, Kasukuwere Tagwirei. So yes, when Tagwirei speaks, we just have to listen. Not because we trust him, not because he offers answers, but because in his voice we hear the echo of a captured state apparatus. A few days ago, something seismic happened, something that not only made front page headlines but spells trouble for the future welfare of Zimbabweans. Kasukuwere Tagwirei, yes, that shadowy fuel magnate, the man behind the curtain, officially joined the ZANU PF Central Committee, and that was just 3 weeks ago. Let's be clear about this. Let's be clear about one thing. This is not a ceremonial appointment. The Central Committee in ZANU PF is the ruling party's highest decision-making body outside of the annual Congress. And from now on, Tagwirei doesn't just bankroll power. He now sits at the table where power is carved and distributed. He is now the second most powerful politician in the Lacoste faction, sitting just beneath Emerson Mnangagwa himself. And it doesn't take the brains of an Einstein, the brains of a political scientist to see what's coming next. Tagwirei is no longer whispering into the ears of the king. He is eyeing the crown himself. For years, Tagwirei has been the financial engine of ZANU PF's campaigns, funding rallies, oiling propaganda machines, buying silence where needed, and loyalty where it counts. Now he's gone from kingmaker to contender. But here is the problem. Tagwirei may have mastered boardrooms and fuel depots, but politics is a whole different ball game altogether. At his debut speech at the National University of Science and Technology on the 26th of June, he casually referred to the next election as scheduled for 2030. That was not just a small slip of the tongue. Not really, not by any chance, because the next election is actually scheduled for sometime in 2028. And that tells you everything. Tagwirei, we are talking about this man here, Tagwirei, who is positioning himself for the highest office in the land. And he doesn't even know the electoral calendar. Tagwirei is out of his depth. He is out of his element. But then here is where it matters. Count him out and you are playing with fire. He is wired into power at every level in ZANU PF. This is not just about a businessman turning into politics. It's about a system so broken that wealth alone is qualification enough to step into the highest office in Zimbabwe. For one fleeting moment, like lightning in the dry season, Tagwirei dropped the mask and told it as it is. He admitted he is corrupt. Yes, you heard that right. The man at the heart of billion-dollar tenders, duty-free diesel, and the Dema disaster. He casually confessed to corruption. But he didn't stop there. He deflected, pointed fingers, and the target was none other than ZANU PF's eternal fall guy, Savior Tyson Kasukuwere, the head of the exiled G40 faction. In Tagwirei's ways, if Kasukuwere is corrupt, then in Tagwirei's ways, if he is corrupt, that is Tagwirei himself, then Kasukuwere is the master of the game. Coming from a man who has practically turned the Zimbabwean economy into a personal automatic teller machine, that's not just irony, that's bold-faced arrogance, almost laughable if the matter were not so serious. But behind these grandiose speeches, confessing to corruption, lies something deeper. It's not confidence, it's not power. To me, this is raw fear, the kind of fear that keeps a man awake at night, even in garden mansions. Because make no mistake, Savior Kasukuwere is not your average exiled politician. He is by far, I will say this, by far the most feared man in ZANU PF's ranks. A political bruiser, raw, unfiltered, and feared. A man with a thuggish reputation carved from years of violence and unrestrained brutality. He is a former CIO agent, the architect of violence during the brutal 2008 elections when MDC supporters were hunted, beaten, and even worse. He is not a man who fades quietly into political exile. He is the face of state-sponsored terror, the poster boy of ZANU PF's darkest instincts. Here is the real issue. Tyson's head is loaded with secrets that could bring down the whole edifice that is the ZANU PF empire, like a boy's sky built with matchsticks on sinking sand. Tyson is ZANU PF's former political commissar. He knows where all the bones are buried and who buried them. From Emerson Mnangagwa's state house to the Shibin and to the small houses, he knows everyone's secrets. He is the man they all fear. He has mapped the entire ZANU PF party like a spy maps the enemy territory. He knows who betrayed whom, who stole what, who killed for power, and who begged for it. That's why Tagwirei lashed out. Not because Kasukuwere is more corrupt, though that's something up for debate, but because Kasukuwere is dangerous, because he is watching and might pounce at any moment, and because he might just have the debt to bring the entire house of cards that is ZANU PF crashing down. A good fraudster, that is what Kasukuwere said in response to Tagwirei's speech at NAST. A good fraudster is not necessarily a good politician. Trying to turn a thief into a leader is the ultimate betrayal of the Revolutionary Party by a reactionary leader. The game has begun, and that rimming mouth will not be opened again. Those were Tyson's exact words in reaction to Tagwirei's address at NAST, like I've said. So when Kudakwa Tagwirei has finally opened up about the infamous Dema power project, he didn't sugarcoat it, he didn't deny it, he didn't hide anything. In fact, he admitted what many already knew or what many already suspected, that the Dema power project was corruption at its worst, that he was handpicked by Robert Mugabe's government, not through competition or merit, but in a quiet backroom deal that reeked of nepotism and state capture. And the only condition imposed on Tagwirei, that Sakunda, Tagwirei's own company, would partner with Derek Chikore, Mugabe's son-in-law. That is the younger brother to Simba Chikore, Bona Mugabe's former husband. Before Sakunda even entered the scene, an American firm called APR had won the tender fair and square. Then the chefs in ZANU PF stepped in. They came up with ridiculous charges. APR was labeled a security threat, and it got nowhere near the construction site in Dema. And the courts could not do anything about the whole saga. No due process, no appeal, no trial. And that is because in Zimbabwe, if you stand between the elites in ZANU PF and their chance for a big fat paycheck, you are gone. And the tragedy didn't just end there. When the Dema plant was finally shut down in 2018, Tagwirei had a useless pile of bricks on his hands. And then Sakunda tried one last confidence trick. They offered to sell the virtually worthless Dema plant back to ZESA for $66 million in US dollars. But ZESA, in a rare act of defiance, said no. They said they could not actually, they didn't want anything to do with the Dema plant. Now, hearing Tagwirei confess it all so plainly, how he was selected, how it was done, who benefited, it should shock the entire Zimbabwe nation. But well, it doesn't, because Zimbabwe has sunk so deep into the black hole of corruption that even the guilt like Tagwirei, you can hear them speak freely, without fear, without shame, and without, and more importantly, without fearing any consequences whatsoever. The Dema Power Project was never just a power plant. It's a monument to the rot. It's the signature of a parasitic elite feasting on a rigged, broken tender system. A system not designed to reward merit, but to enrich the well-connected and the crooked. And in the case of Kasukuwere Tagwirei, there wasn't even the pretense to go through the tender system. The Procurement Regulatory Authority of Zimbabwe never got a chance. It was pushed aside by the so-called directive from Robert Mugabe's regime. This is what Tagwirei meant when he casually stated that he got the tender through cabinet authority. And to top it all, there was no bidding, no scrutiny, no competition. The deal was just handed to Tagwirei straight into his lap. Because this is in business, it's a cartel, a shadow state run by factions in ZANU PF, each with its own set of business mafiosi. On one side, you have got Lacoste, fronted by Emerson Mnangagwa himself, but bankrolled by the ever-present Tagwirei. On the other hand, you have the G40, led from exile by Savior Kasukuwere, a political bruiser with unfinished business and a long memories. And if you think the battle is just Lacoste versus G40, you are mistaken. You are backing up the wrong tree. Because while Tagwirei was busy preaching to the Lacoste faithful in Bulawayo, something even more chilling was happening elsewhere. Constantino Chiwenga, the general, the vice president, and the architect behind the military-aligned Koslek faction, on the 26th of June, at more or less the same time Tagwirei was blabbering about the Dema project, Chiwenga was in Vic Falls. He blamed Zimbabwe's economic implosion not on sanctions, not on the West, but this time on corrupt businessmen whom he labeled had no traceable capital and no legitimate industries to talk of. This was deliberate. This was a shot aimed squarely at Tagwirei. This isn't just a war of ideology. This is a war between Chidumo and Masendeke over who gets to wear the mask of legitimacy. And let's not fool ourselves. Some naive voices, people like Blessed Geza, they still believe that Chiwenga is the real deal, the man who is going to get Zimbabwe back to its feet. We are being tried, or at least from Geza's perspective, we are being trained to think that Chiwenga is a saint, a savior, a man of principle. But far from it, this is just like handing over a flock of sheep to a wolf. Chiwenga is not the antidote. In fact, he is the real reason why Zimbabwe is in this kind of mess. We need to stop pretending that there are clean hands in ZANU PF. We need to stop pretending that Chiwenga's anti-corruption summons are anything more than power plays wrapped in hypocrisy. Let's start with the facts. Chiwenga is not just a military man. He is a godfather, a silent patron of powerful economic mafias operating just as ruthlessly and just as illegally as those tied to Kudakwashe, Tagwirei and Emerson Mnangagwa. Take Tafazwa Msarara, for instance, the chairman of the Grain Millers Association of Zimbabwe. Well, some people consider him the public face of food security. Perhaps, maybe. But behind the scenes, he is a smuggling kingpin with deep networks shipping Zimbabwean maize illegally into places like the DRC and even far beyond. And guess who backs him? That's Chiwenga himself. So while the general runs around waving the anti-Tagwirei banners, calling out Tenderpreneurs, he conveniently forgets that the cartel bosses who are eating at his table, he conveniently forgets that the people like Msarara are his own proteges. And it doesn't end there. Let's talk about ZINARA, the Zimbabwean National Roads Administration. This is a 200 million a year massive pot of public funds that doesn't even report to Parliament. And who controls it? It's a guy named Michael Madana, a man from Weza, just like Chiwenga himself. Is this a coincidence? No! He is Chiwenga's homeboy, pure and simple. ZINARA, just like the two branches of the military, the Air Force and the Army, is Chiwenga's fiefdom. And through ZINARA, Chiwenga's proteges get a piece of the action. Remember Superman 1-0, Chiwenga's golden boy who once won an 8 million ZINARA contract. He was supposed to buy graders, but what did he do? He went to some country in Eastern Europe there and he bought some snow plows for ZINARA. That was way back in 2012. But what do you do with snow plows in Zimbabwe? A country that hasn't even seen snow since the Stone Age. We do not even have a word for snow not in any language in Zimbabwe, not in any dialect of Shona, not in Isindebele, not in Venda, not in Tonga. This isn't just about incompetence. This is open, arrogant looting. So this is ZANU PF. So this is what we have. Mnangagwa's Lacoste faction marching behind the millions offered by Kudakwashe Tagwirei, polishing the crown and preparing Tagwirei to take over the party and potentially the country of Zimbabwe. Across the aisle, you have got the soldiers, Chiwenga's Coast-like faction, less polished, more brutal, but no less ambitious. They are lining up their own horse, that is Chiwenga himself, for the succession race. And then there is the G40. The G40, Xavier Tyson, Kasukuwere, the likes of Walter Mzembe. Well, he is back, he's in prison. I'm not sure whether he's been released or anything. They are all exiled, quiet but not dead. The Mugabe era technocrats are still waiting for the day when they can land at Harare Airport and take a taxi back to their villas in Greystone Park and Borodale Brook. Jonathan Moyo is squatting in Nairobi with his terraras. Patrick Joao is doing whatever he can to survive in Cape Town. I'm not sure whether he is polishing people's shoes or doing whatever he can. Well, but that's besides the point anyway. And while their political faces may have scattered, their business tycoons never left. You see, the late Robert Mugabe's favorite capitalists were not war veterans or liberation icons. They were former Rhodesians in tailored business suits. Men like Simon Radland, the so-called tobacco baron, who is flooding Southern Africa with smuggled cigarettes, raking in profits in the millions while state hospitals run on candles, while kids in Binga take their classes under mango trees. You have Billy Rottenbach, who plays both sides in terms of the ZANU PF factions. He was G40 financier under Robert Mugabe, and now under Emerson Mnangagwa, he is now compensated for land he never even owned in the first place. All vets at Springs and Stem Farm have to be evicted to make way for Billy Rottenbach. Well, that is the list of the business mafia, the oligarchs, or whatever name you might want to give them. Then you have got like Adam Molai. He might not be your usual ex-Rhodesian. He is the owner of Pacific Cigarette Company, and he's a quite refined, respectable guy. He went to Peterhouse College and some fancy colleges in the UK and the United States, but he is still a G40 financier with deep links to a party faction, that is the G40. People long thought to be buried. But what does this all have to do with Tagwirei and the fight to succeed Emerson Mnangagwa? Well, it's everything, because the business cartels, whether run by Tagwirei, Simon Radland, or Chiwenga's Zinara Mafia, they are not sideshows. They are the fuel that keeps the ZANU PF machine running. They are the bank rollers of power. ZANU PF cannot campaign without the business mafia and the cartels that run the economy. ZANU PF cannot win an election without them. ZANU PF cannot survive without the Tenderpreneurs, the oligarchs. It cannot survive without them. Tagwirei's millions made the 2018 election victory possible for Emerson Mnangagwa. And while the business mafia and the cartels grease the wheels of dictatorship, the ordinary Zimbabwean bleeds. Let's make one thing very clear. The dictatorship suffocating Zimbabwe isn't just ZANU PF. It's something bigger. It's something more elusive. It's something more dangerous. It's a business elite rotten to the core, keeping an entire nation on its knees. You can call them whatever you like: Zigananda, Tenderpreneurs, cartel kings, oligarchs. But names don't change the damage. Phraseology does not come into this whole thing, because these are the real men who bankroll tyranny. These are the merchants of misery. Every election cycle, when ZANU PF is on life support, these crooked businessmen arrive with bags stuffed with wads of US dollars. They pump the fuel. They resuscitate the ZANU PF. They breathe life into the dead horse that is Emerson Mnangagwa's regime. The business mafia and their cartels don't just prop up power. They postpone inclusive, people-centered transformation. They prolong the pain and the misery of ordinary Zimbabweans. They delay the rise of a truly people-driven opposition. They make sure those dinosaurs past their sell-by date, men who should be footnotes in history, geriatrics like Emerson Mnangagwa and Kembo Mohadi, they make sure that these ancient Tate gurus are still running the affairs of millions of Zimbabweans. And among these crooks, one man towers above the rest: Tagwirei. Just pick the name of any gold mine in Zimbabwe. Frida Rebecca mine, How mine, those nickel mines in Bindura. Yes, they are now all owned by Tagwirei. When it comes to exporting gold out of Zimbabwe, we are told the Fidelity Printers handles everything. But that is now all a facade. That is now all a lie. Tagwirei is now in charge of gold exports. Well, it's not actually exporting. It's literally smuggling everything in its raw form out of Zimbabwe. The Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, the institution that's supposed to protect the nation's economy, it instead operates like a private vault for Tagwirei's empire. Remember in 2019, while pensioners queued for worthless dollars and hospitals ran out of drugs, the RBZ quietly pumped millions of hard currency into Tagwirei's companies. And what happened? The Zim dollar collapsed overnight. It lost 23% of its value, not because of sanctions, not because of drought, but because one man and his empire, that is Tagwirei, sucked the forex out of the economy like a vacuum cleaner. Pensioners lost a lifetime of savings. Public servants, nurses, teachers, civil servants were reduced to beggars, and yet the champagne just flowed at the top as if everything was honky-dory, everything was normal. Because in Zimbabwe, the poor bleed while the rich feast. And this isn't just an accident. This is the business model. It's a system designed with only one goal in mind: primitive accumulation of wealth and unjust enrichment. ZANU PF's army of spokespeople will try to convince you that Zimbabwe's chief exports are gold, lithium, and tobacco. But don't buy the lie, because the real exports are not minerals. The real exports, the chief export that is in terms of Zimbabwe, it's now our own people, our own youth, the future of Zimbabwe. Our best and brightest are now waiting tables in Cape Town. They are now laborers on construction sites in the concrete jungles of Johannesburg, care home assistants in the United Kingdom, Uber drivers in Canada, and the list goes on. And it's not because they chose to leave, but because they were forced to flee a life of abject poverty into the uncertainty of economic exile. They have been turned into economic refugees by a cartel economy that has plundered the state and strangled our collective futures. Zimbabwe today is not poor by accident, it's poor by design. And until these cartels are broken, until these Ganandas are brought before the courts and account for their misdeeds, Zimbabwe will continue to bleed. It's not that what the business mafia is doing in Zimbabwe is a mystery. No, it's not hidden in offshore accounts or encrypted files. It's all there in black and white. Mildred Chisi, the Auditor General, has it all. She has got the files in her office somewhere in a cabinet on the 5th floor of Park's house in Harare's prestigious Kwame Nkrumah Avenue. There are names, numbers, dates, receipts, every missing dollar, every inflated invoice, every rigged contract signed in the shadows. All the evidence you need to go after these Ganandas is all there. But what's the point of knowing the truth if no one acts on it? If those armed with the power to prosecute look the other way? But because, let's be honest, ZAC, the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission, is not hunting the wolves, it's chasing the small-time pickpockets at Mbare Musika, making a Hollywood-style show out of going after the low-hanging fruit. Muzembe here, a G40 scapegoat there, all while the real looters toast champagne at private clubs like the Harare Sports Club. This is not justice. This is just theater. This is just performance. It's what happens when state institutions like the ZAC, the RBZ, Zinara stop serving the people and are now at the beck and call of the business mafia with ties to the elites in ZANU PF. This isn't the rule of law. No. This is rule by law, a weaponization of the legal system. Kutonga ne demo, kutonga ne sando, as we say in my Karanga variety of Shona. Governance through the axe and the hammer. So as long as the law is used selectively, so as long as institutions such as the courts are weaponized to pursue ZANU PF's enemies, real and imagined, Zimbabwe will remain in this twilight of fake accountability. We don't need more arrests for the cameras. We need the real criminals dragged from behind their tinted glass and razor wire fences. Those tenderpreneurs, the fuel barons, the forex pirates, They all should face the music where there is evidence of criminal acts. The first step, just let ZAC off the leash. Restore ZAC to its original mandate as per the Constitution of 2013. Let it go after the true architects of poverty, not just ZANU PF's political enemies. Because until that happens, corruption will not be punished, it will simply be rewarded. And meanwhile, if you are an ordinary Tom or Jack dreaming of launching a small operation, you are locked out. You can't get a license, you can't get capital, because the system isn't just tilted, it's rigged. And it's not just forex. Mining licenses are the real jackpot in Zimbabwe's rigged casino economy. The country is sitting on gold, lithium, platinum, wealth that could transform a generation. But instead of transparent allocation, we get backroom deals, forged documents, and ghost claims signed before the claimants were even born. Yes, you heard that right. And I just have to give you the example of Collins Mnangagwa, the president's son. He has appeared at mining sites claiming ownership of mining claims based on paperwork which dates before he was even born. In any functioning system, no one would dare pull such a stunt. It would be laughed out of court. But here we are talking of Emmerson Mnangagwa's Zimbabwe, a banana republic where a tiny, well-connected elite is reaping millions without even producing even a simple item like a fork or a spoon. But here is the question, why not just auction the mining licenses? Why not build a public, accountable, merit-based system? Because transparency doesn't feed the cartels. Because ZANU PF doesn't thrive on fairness, it thrives on open favoritism. Zimbabwe is being bled to death not by sanctions, not by drought, but by a deliberate, calculated system that hands national wealth to a tiny, well-connected elite, while the talented and deserving are locked out. And as long as the John Mshayavanus of this world hold the pen, and as long as the Tagwireis of this world hold the purse strings, the future will remain forever mortgaged to the past. Well, thank you for tuning in, and until next time, it's goodbye for now. Tatenda siaonga.